Now, more than 4 decades after the victory of the Islamic Revolution, the United States persists on its hostile posture toward Iran, a policy that's cost America trillions of dollars in West Asia and made it lose a strategic position throughout the region. And when it comes to the U.S. public, even well-educated Americans have wrong perceptions when it comes to Iran. Some would argue that this is true when it comes to politicians as well. So one thing is certain, though, in this case, ignorance is not bliss, but a source of grave danger.
"44 years of standing to U.S. hegemony."
Hello, everyone, and welcome to We the People. I'm your host, Daniel Arya. I want to start this episode by asking you a question. Why do you think it's so hard for the U.S. to accept the Islamic Republic of Iran? Many answers have been given, and we'll deal with them in a short time. But it's good to know, although Tehran and Washington do not have diplomatic relations, they did engage in the past, like the Iran nuclear deal. Now, Iran has not started a war in the past 2 centuries, and you perhaps know America's record. Now, all that is to say the answer to that question has been rather elusive. And bear with us, and we're going to put that question into perspective and hopefully come up with an answer. As usual, we are pleased to have our 2 guests on our show, Matthew Earhart, a political analyst joining us from Montreal, Canada, and Robert Patillo, a civil rights attorney joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. Stay tuned.
Island of Stability is a phrase that became the namesake for a 1977 speech by American President Jimmy Carter while he was being hosted by former Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, at the Neovaran Palace in Tehran. Carter described Iran as an island of stability in a turbulent corner of the world. He also claimed in the same speech that the Shah was a popular king among the Iranian people. Well, to make the long story short, the same Shah was toppled in a popular revolution just over a year later.
Iran, because of the great leadership of the Shah, is an island of stability in one of the more troubled areas of the world. This is a great tribute to you, Your Majesty, and to your leadership, and to the respect and the admiration and love which your people give to you.
Now, Carter's speech was a total lack of understanding of historical legacies and the political fires raging in Iran. So why did he and others get it so wrong?
Well, I think that Jimmy Carter and the Shah had a lot in common in the sense that they were both very simple-minded puppets who were used by forces they didn't fully themselves understand. And in the case of Jimmy Carter, it's an irony that he was celebrating the stabilizing factor of Iran, while at the same time, his Trilateral Commission controllers, including Zbigniew Brzezinski, Samuel P. Huntington, who worked with the State Department, Bernard Lewis, were putting into motion a policy that involved the arc of crisis, destabilizing the entirety of the Middle East, with a focus obviously on Iran, but also with the intention of ultimately gaining control through divide and conquer of the entirety of the Eurasian landmass. So the Shah was himself a complete puppet, as far as I could see, who often didn't understand the environment he was in, who had given his trust and delegated authorization to forces that meant only to do evil for both the Iranian people as well as the broader community of Arabs in the world.
Now, accuracy is anything but a luxury in U.S. media where Iran is concerned. America's Iran debate has been dominated by uninformed misrepresentation of the country. U.S. media routinely portray Iran as an irrational actor in the region or try to represent the country as an illegitimate government. Now this, as many U.S. allies in the region are absolute monarchies that have not even seen ballot boxes in their history.
Well, the media acts as a propaganda wing of the U.S. foreign policy apparatus. We remember, if you remember, during the Iran-Iraq War, for example, the media gave glowing reviews to Iraq when it came to the invasion of Iran against all international laws. We saw during the U.S. invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan the way the U.S. media was used to propagandize the people to think that all Muslims were the enemy, to think that all Middle Easterners were somehow had hatred of America and wanted to destroy America, as opposed to the facts on the ground.
Now, American discourse on Iranian politics and foreign policy has rarely taken the full range of relevant facts. Carter's view regarding Iran was also echoed in American media. Now, this was a time of the Cold War. U.S. investigative journalists were appreciated very much, but they too didn't really have a grasp of the reality. Why?
If you talk to many Americans or look at much American media, they describe Shahist Iran as being almost this utopia where Western values were pushed, where women had the right to drive, where they did not have to wear veils. And they still describe the Islamic State as being an oppressive regime. This is what the Carter policy was, and this is why they gave shelter to the Shah once he was deposed. And this continues to be American policy going forward because they want to control that region of the world, and having a puppet government in place is very helpful to Western powers.
The prevailing Iran misrepresentations are rarely challenged in mainstream discourse. This is because such a challenge would then provoke other questions like America's bigger role in West Asia.
If you look at the media coverage of the Iranian or the Islamic Republic in the United States, the only thing that the American people ever see are burning of the American flag and people chanting death to America, when in reality that is not the truth of what goes on there. So I think more independent media is going to have to show the truth of what happens within those borders to the American people so they can start demanding a change in U.S. policy. The average American does not know the difference between Iran and Iraq. For example, the average American doesn't understand the history of the Islamic Republic. If you ask the average American what they know about the Islamic Republic, they will know the hostage crisis that happened under Jimmy Carter. They will know the missile strikes that happened under the Trump administration, but very little other information. And until we can start getting the information out and humanizing the Republic, we're going to continue to see this almost demonization and axis of evil speak that we heard during the Bush regime.
From the earliest days of the Islamic Republic, many Americans have believed that their country has legitimate grievances against it. They have also been bombarded with stories that show Iran with a negative light.
The media has been terribly destructive, and there has been a coordinated effort to try to create a psychological trauma and a disorder in the American population of media consumers, who are still led to believe that the hostage crisis of 1979 is proof of Iran's evil, and they ignore all of the evil actually done in the name of the United States and by forces representing U.S. military power. Iran itself, there's never been a single international court case that has demonstrated any case of Iran's support of terrorism. It doesn't exist, and yet most Americans have been led to believe by the media that Iran is the number one backer of terrorism. It's absurd. But again, as you pointed out, people are believing the corporate media, which is tied to intelligence. Things like CIA Mockingbird has never gone away, which is where the CIA controlled many voices of influence amongst all of the media during the Cold War. That only got more powerful.
In September 1987, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, then the Iranian president, told the United Nations General Assembly that no revolution is safe from the counter-strikes of the power system dominating our world, but the variety, the depth, and the enormity of enmities and the wild anger unleashed against us constitute an exceptionally interesting story. Now, this view remains widely shared by his compatriots. So why is America so hell-bent on confronting the Iranian Revolution?
Well, the fear of the Americans was always that the Iranian Revolution would spread. We have seen throughout the course of the post-war era, since World War II, America, Britain, France, and the Western powers attempting to ensure that they have their own people in place throughout that region, primarily to control the oil and gas revenues that come from those areas. We saw that Saddam Hussein in Iraq was an ally of America until he wasn't, at which point they launched two wars against him to depose him. We saw the quote-unquote Arab Spring, which was financed and sponsored by the United States and Great Britain, to take out Muslim leaders during that period of time and put in place their own leadership. So the reason that the U.S. continues to have this stance towards the Iranian regime is that the Iranian regime does not want to capitulate to Western powers, does not want to be a puppet of the Western government.
It is hard for most Americans to accept the legitimacy of a political order that seeks to combine religious authority with democratic institutions and practices, especially when it also has the audacity to question the goodness of American ambitions in the world.
Look at what America's done to countries like Cuba or to North Korea. If you will not come in line with what they call the rules-based order, they have no problem excluding them from the international economy, from international trade, from the international diplomatic system. And this appears to be the stance of the United States government, whether it be a Republican or a Democrat in office. This continues to be the policy.
The U.S. sanctions regime against Iran is described as unprecedented and maximum pressure campaign. But despite all these pressures, the Islamic Republic has thrived in the past years.
Well, I believe the Iranians did some very miraculous work, especially since the revolution, and they were never meant to survive the 1980s in any real sustained way. The U.S. had, as we know, engaged in massive economic warfare, applying vast sanctions, confiscating Iranian assets in the tune of $6 billion. That were in U.S. banks. This was a precedent for what was later done to Russia more recently and other countries, Venezuela. But the idea was Iran was supposed to be crushed, crippled, and destroyed economically and culturally and on every other level. So by Iran having been able to both survive, create the foundations upon which a new idea of foreign policy cooperation with their neighbors and other nations who are resisting this Anglo-American imperial war drive that had been, this is not a new thing. They represent a force that has to be, that gives, I think, the Anglo-Americans today a lot to be afraid of.
Many would say the ultimate goal of U.S. military march in West Asia was Iran. The costly wars in Iraq and Afghanistan didn't bring the intended results for Washington. If anything, they just eroded its hegemony and its strategic position in the region.
Concept around much of the Bush foreign policy was to, on the one hand, take over Iraq and make them a puppet state of the United States of America, to the east or to the west of Iran, and then take over Afghanistan to the east of Iran and sandwich them in, cut off trade, cut off their ability to maintain the state, and then sponsor counter-revolutions within the nation to topple the government. Clearly, the ineptitude of the Bush regime was unable to do so, and the Obama administration made some steps towards attempting to stabilize and normalize relations, but we've seen that the conservative political party here in the United States of America maintains the antiquated view of isolation and separation of Iran from international politics.
American leaders have had strategic miscalculations in West Asia. Just a couple of weeks ago, some officials in Washington behaved as if Iran was on the verge of collapse, given the backdrop of the riots in the country.
It wasn't a miscalculation. It was an attempt to try to push the Iranian people to overthrow the regime. They knew exactly what was happening after the death of Mahsa Amini and the subsequent protests thereafter. But we do know for a fact that the United States intelligence organizations, including the CIA and other groups, have a hand in sponsoring these counter-revolutions and people's uprisings around the world. The hope of the American government was that the protests surrounding the Iranian secret police would lead to the overthrow and toppling of the quote-unquote regime. But that was never a miscalculation, more so a hope and a ambition of the state. I think that what America has to begin to do is understand that they can no longer just try to inspire these coups in foreign governments across the world, as we've seen for the past half century, but rather engage in the type of hard diplomatic work needed to find a middle ground so that we are able to normalize relations.
Now, as Tehran challenges America's hegemonic ambitions in the region, think tank and university specialists have given quasi-professional legitimization to the prevailing narratives of U.S. media about Iran. These narratives have almost become conventional wisdom among American elites. What's your opinion?
The American foreign policy establishment has become drunk on their own creative writing and myth making. So even drug dealers know you shouldn't consume your own drugs. The problem is these foreign policy analysts who then feed into Washington, NATO, NATO policy making circles, they end up creating stories to self-flatter themselves and also shape their own idea of wishful thinking upon what they wish the world would be, without recognizing what the world actually is. And I think this has really created a problem of insanity, where those who are trying to shape the world are themselves acting on a world that doesn't exist.
After the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Iranian leaders highlighted the strategy of resistance. The famed axis of resistance that many refer to comes from this very strategy. So how do you think this Iran-inspired strategy will change the equations in the region in the future?
Well, we already see that through the survivors club, as one could call it, of nations who are resisting unipolar hegemony. Iran has played a key role. So has Syria, forces within Palestine, forces within Lebanon, forces within Yemen, at different times have played a very important role to both put out fires that have been set by CIA MI6 connected arsonists who would like to use jihadi groups and other Islamist organizations to carry out chaos operations in order to, again, manage chaos.
Now, over the years, Washington has sporadically engaged Tehran in various ways on various issues, but these diplomatic efforts, like the JCPOA or the Iran nuclear deal, have not been very successful. Do you think that the United States will come to terms with the Islamic Republic in the end?
Well, they won't have a choice. They say fate leads the willing and the unwilling drags. And I think that at this point, Iran has demonstrated a strong capacity to stand on their own 2 feet economically, diplomatically. They have created very strategic, important alliances with nations that don't want to destroy them, but would rather create stability. I speak, of course, of especially Russia and China, but also of the other Gulf states and other Arab nations that have seen a transformation in a way of thinking in regards to Iran, with Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the UAE, all increasingly recognizing the need to begin to build bridges of cooperation with Iran, which has a lot to do with the power of Russia and China entering into the scene with a new economic and political philosophy, very different from that coming out of power structures of the West, and much more in harmony, has never gone away, which is where the CIA controlled many voices of influence amongst all of the media during the Cold War. That only got more powerful.
For Washington, the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran represented a devastating strategic loss. The U.S. lost a close ally in the region that had become the cornerstone of America's security architecture for protecting Western interests in West Asia. The revolution, for sure, took Washington by surprise. It was a shock which Uncle Sam still has not recovered from. Back in March 1979, a New York Times columnist wrote, "How could the Shah, a monarch who commanded more tanks than the British Army, more helicopters than the United States 1st Cavalry in Vietnam, be pressured so neatly out of power?"
Now, that question is still an open one in U.S. political spheres. There are also other modern versions of the same question, like how could Iran survive all of these sanctions and still thrive in the region? Now, the answer to such questions lies in the lack of U.S. recognition of the realities on the ground in Iran. If the U.S. does not change its approach regarding Iran, it is doomed to ask the same questions again and again. And now let's see what Abbas Mutarim has prepared for us this week.
The Islamic Revolution of 1979 is one of the most significant revolutions in contemporary history. It marks the first time in modern times where an Islamic revolution overthrew a Western-backed regime and installed an Islamic government. And it was a mass revolution where the people went to the street and demanded the overthrow of the Shah. This happened during a time in history where Marxism was seen as the only type of revolution that could be successful. Well, the Islamic Revolution of Iran, it showed that an Islamic revolution was and is possible. It shows that Islam is a religion that leaves no area of life untouched, and the Islamic Revolution, it helped revive Islam to its roots as an anti-oppressive force seeking to establish justice in all areas of life. As Imam Khomeini said, Islam is the religion of militant individuals who are committed to truth and justice. It is the religion of those who desire freedom and independence. It is the school of those who struggle against imperialism. The Islamic Revolution, it changed the region. It changed influence in the region. It helped inspire and it helped build Islamic movements seeking to overthrow Western imperialism. And it could be said that a core principle of the Islamic Revolution is Islamic unity. And Islamic unity, it's evident in the cause for Palestine. Senior military commanders within the Palestinian resistance factions, they have praised the Islamic Republic of Iran for providing military, logistical, and aid to the Palestinian resistance in occupied Palestine. Iran's support of Hezbollah has also been a major source of anti-imperialist action in the region. When the Zionists attacked Lebanon, it was the Islamic Republic of Iran that provided material support and military aid. And Hezbollah, despite constant aggression from the Zionists, it has been a major supporter of the liberation of Palestine. The Islamic Republic of Iran, it has also supported Ansar Allah in Yemen in their fight against the Saudi, UAE, USA, and UK siege on their land. The Islamic Republic has also supported the Syrian government in its fight against ISIS and the color revolution that has been supported by the West. And Iran, it was able to mobilize Russia to support Syria as well. Not only that, but when ISIS essentially took over Iraq, it was the Islamic Republic of Iran that helped defeat ISIS. And this impacted Africa as well. With the defeat of ISIS, it also means that their capability for terrorist activities within the continent itself was weakened. And all this was made possible by the Islamic Revolution of 1979. The Islamic Revolution has promoted Islamic unity, and Iran has been a staunch supporter of one of the architect of the axis of resistance, which is actively working to free the land from Western imperialism. And this is all bringing stability to the region, something that the West and its Zionist and Wahhabi counterparts do not want. This is why the so-called United States has done everything and anything to try and stop Iran. This is why you see the West organize color revolutions against the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is why the Zionist entity commit drone strikes and clandestine operations against the Islamic Republic. The West and its proxies, they do not want Muslims to truly be free and govern themselves. And the Islamic Revolution, it's a constant reminder that Western hegemony can and it will be broken. The land, it will be free. This is Power to the People.
And that was our show, everyone. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, Daniel Arya. Do join us again next time for another episode of We the People. Bye-bye for now.